I didn't know it yet, but the moment I turned into that gravel driveway, my own son had already decided to sell my future behind my back. Before we begin, a huge thank you to all of you. We've officially hit 500 subscribers. It's a small milestone but a big deal for us. And now our eyes are set on the 1,000 subscribers goal. To help us get there, please hit the like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how you're doing. Your support truly encourages us and keeps this channel going now. Let's jump into the story. The mountain lodge came into view just as the sun dipped low, painting the stone walls gold. 2 floors of hand-cut timber, river rock stacked with care. The porch where my brother Robert and I used to sit in summer, shelling peas and arguing about nothing that mattered. And in the driveway 2 cars that shouldn't have been there. My son James's black BMW, and a contractor's truck with a logo on the door. I stayed in my car longer than I should have, gripping the steering wheel until my thumb ached. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my chest. I hadn't told James when I'd be arriving. I certainly hadn't invited anyone else. Inside, voices echoed through the great room. Extend the deck here. Wrap it around the south side. Permits will take 60 days, but I have contacts. I stepped forward, and the talking stopped. 12 people stood inside my lodge. Not just James, not just his wife, Bella. There were architects with blueprints, women tapping on tablets. Even a photographer setting up lights. Like this place was already a product. James smiled when he saw me. Mom, perfect timing. Come meet Dylan, he's the architect. I didn't shake the man's hand. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding, I said calmly. This property was left to me. Decisions about it are mine alone. Bella's smile was smooth and practiced. Of course, Evelyn. We're just preparing options for when you're ready. When you're ready. Not if. That's when I understood. They weren't asking, they were assuming. I want everyone to leave, I said. Now, the room froze. The photographer lowered his camera. The architect gathered his papers. One by one, they filed out until only James and Bella remained. Bella leaned close and whispered, "You're standing in the way of something very valuable." I looked at my son, my only child, and realized I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with a plan. And I was the obstacle. But what I found later that night hidden in my brother's private files proved this wasn't just greed. It was something far darker and far more dangerous. The lodge should have felt comforting when I arrived. Familiar, quiet, safe. Instead, it felt watched. The porch light was on. I was certain I'd turned it off months ago. I stood there for a moment, keys clenched in my hand, listening to the wind move through the pines. The mountains loomed dark and still, like they were holding their breath. I told myself James couldn't be here. He'd promised to give me space. And yet, something about the air told me I wasn't alone. Inside, the smell hit me first. Fresh coffee. Not the stale scent of a closed house, but warm, recent. My heart thudded as I stepped into the great room. Furniture had been shifted. A chair angled toward the fireplace. Blue painter's tape marked spots on the hardwood floor. On the long dining table sat a rolled set of papers held together with a rubber band. Blueprints. I dropped my bag. They hadn't waited for permission. They hadn't waited for grief to settle. They had come to my brother's home and started planning. As if the decision was already made. I flipped through the papers with shaking hands. Labels jumped out at me. Expanded deck, guest suites, commercial kitchen. Someone had written numbers in red ink. Profit margins, seasonal projections. This wasn't an idea. It was a plan already in motion. A car door slammed outside. I turned just as James walked in, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low voice. He froze when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he said quickly, ending the call. "Mom, you're early." Early? Like I was a guest in my own house. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the blueprints. James sighed, rubbing his face like I was being unreasonable. Preparation. Nothing's final. You brought architects into my brother's lodge without asking. You were going to say no anyway. He snapped, then caught himself. Look, we're just thinking ahead. Bella appeared behind him, perfectly composed, eyes already scanning my reaction. Evelyn, you have to understand, this property is bleeding money. Taxes alone. Stop, I said quietly. Both of them froze. This lodge is not a business opportunity. It's not leverage. It's not yours. James's voice hardened. Everything you have eventually becomes mine. The words landed heavier than any shout. I realized then what Robert had been protecting, not just the land, but me. Later that night, alone by the fireplace, I opened the envelope Robert had left sealed in his desk drawer. Inside was a handwritten letter and a warning that made my blood run cold. Because my brother hadn't just predicted betrayal, he'd named the people behind it and what they were capable of doing next. I didn't open the letter right away. It sat in my hands, heavier than paper should be, like it carried more than ink. Robert's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly to the right, steady even near the end of his life. He'd always written like a man who knew exactly what he wanted to say. I finally unfolded it and sat at his old desk. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and things have already started to feel wrong. My chest tightened. I didn't leave you the lodge because it was valuable. I left it to you because you're the only one I trust to protect it. I swallowed hard and kept reading. James came to me 3 years ago asking for money. A lot of it. He said it was for an investment. It wasn't. It was debt. Gambling debt. My hands began to shake. Robert explained everything, how James had begged, promised repayment, then grown angry when Robert refused. How a woman named Bella had later appeared, polite and polished, offering to help mediate. Robert hadn't trusted her from the start. She asked too many questions, he wrote. About the lodge, about zoning, about what would happen if I died. I leaned back in the chair, the room suddenly too small. Robert had investigated her quietly, hired someone, found patterns, other families, other properties, always the same outcome. Assets stripped, homes lost, people left broken. This is why the final clause exists. The letter continued. If they try to force a sale or development, the lodge leaves the family forever. It was the only way to stop them. I felt sick. The silence in the lodge pressed in on me. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind outside, felt louder now, sharper. At the bottom of the letter was one final paragraph. You must let them reveal themselves. Don't confront them too soon. Don't sign anything. And if a man named David Sterling ever contacts you, call the police first. Then a lawyer. David Sterling, Tiger. I folded the letter just as headlights swept across the front windows. Someone was pulling into the driveway. I hadn't invited anyone. My heart began to race as a knock echoed through the lodge, slow, confident, deliberate, because the man standing on my porch that night wasn't family, and he wasn't asking for permission. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood perfectly still in the hallway, listening. The knock came again, firm, unhurried. Like the person on the other side knew I would eventually comply. Through the narrow window beside the door, I saw him, expensive coat, confident posture. 2 other men waited several steps behind him near a black SUV. Arms crossed, eyes scanning the property like security. My stomach turned. Mrs. Gable, the man called calmly. My name is David Sterling. I believe we need to talk. Every word from Robert's letter screamed in my head. I kept the chain on and opened the door only a few inches. I have nothing to say to you. He smiled, polite, controlled, and completely empty. I think you do. I'm James's business partner. My son has no authority here, I replied. This is my property. Sterling nodded slowly, as if indulging a child. Of course. That's why I'm here. To make things easier. Against my better judgment, I listened. He explained smoothly, confidently that James owed a great deal of money. Old loans. Accumulated interest. Unfortunate timing. But all of it, he assured me, was fixable. I'm prepared to make you an offer, he said. Cash. No delays. No complications. He slid a card through the gap in the door. $1.8 million for the lodge. My breath caught. You walk away comfortable, Sterling continued. James's debt disappears. Everyone wins. And if I refuse? I asked. His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes cooled. Then things get complicated. He leaned closer. James already signed certain documents. Transfer agreements. Powers he believed he had. He doesn't. In court, Sterling said softly, belief matters more than truth. Litigation could drag on for years. Legal fees alone would bleed you dry. The words landed like a threat wrapped in a business proposal. You'd die fighting, he added gently. Alone. That was enough. Get off my property, I said, now. Sterling straightened, unfazed. I'll give you 48 hours. Think carefully. After that, I can't guarantee how smoothly this goes. They left as calmly as they arrived. I watched the SUV disappear down the mountain road, my hands trembling so badly I had to sit down. Within minutes, I called the police. But when the deputy arrived and took my statement, his expression told me everything. Ma'am, he said kindly, he didn't technically threaten you. After he left, I sat on the porch in the cold, staring at the mountains. They weren't asking anymore. They were closing in. And the worst part, I hadn't even seen what my own son had already signed behind my back. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made my heart jump, the wind through the trees. The snap of a branch, the distant rumble of a car far down the mountain road. By dawn, my nerves were raw, my coffee untouched and cold beside me. I knew one thing for certain, David Sterling hadn't come unprepared, and if James had signed something, I needed to know exactly what. I waited until mid-morning before calling James. He answered on the third ring, his voice tense, like he'd been expecting me. He came here, I said, without greeting. Silence. You said you wanted space, James finally muttered. A man named David Sterling stood on my porch and told me I had 48 hours to sell my brother's lodge. His breath caught. He wasn't supposed to do that. That told me everything. I demanded he come up to the lodge alone. No Bella, no excuses. When he arrived, he looked nothing like the confident son I'd seen at the will reading. His shoulders were slumped, dark circles carved under his eyes. His expensive car parked crooked in the drive. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I used to drink tea in the evenings. Tell me the truth, I said. All of it. James broke. He confessed to years of gambling, online betting, loans stacked on top of loans. Sterling hadn't been a stranger. He'd been a lifeline. Or so James thought. High-interest money that turned vicious when payments slipped. Bella had encouraged him, convinced him that the lodge was the solution to everything. She said it was temporary, he whispered. Just until we flipped it. I asked about the paperwork. James slid a folder across the table with shaking hands. Inside were contracts he barely understood, agreements granting conditional management authority, letters of intent, documents filled with legal language designed to confuse. Nothing outright transferred ownership, but enough to start a legal war. He told me it was standard, James said, that once you agreed, it would all be clean. I closed the folder. You tried to sell my life to save your own, I said quietly. Tears filled his eyes. I didn't think he'd threaten you. That was the moment I stopped seeing my son as just a victim. He had made choices. Hard ones, dangerous ones, and now we were both paying the price. I told James he was not welcome to stay at the lodge. He didn't argue. As his car disappeared down the drive, I realized something chilling. Sterling wasn't bluffing, And Bella hadn't been improvising. They'd been planning this for years, long before my brother died. That night, I finally opened the locked safe in Robert's office and discovered proof that this scheme was far bigger than my family. Robert had always been a careful man, not paranoid, just prepared. So when I found the small metal safe hidden behind a framed photograph in his office, I wasn't surprised. What startled me was how heavy it felt when I pulled it free, like it held more than documents. The key was taped to the back of the frame. Inside the safe were folders, neatly labeled in Robert's handwriting, dates, names, places. I spread them across the desk, my heart pounding as the pattern revealed itself. This wasn't just about James. There were records of other families' different last names, different properties, same structure. Lodges, farms, small hotels, always someone in debt, always a helpful investor, always a fast offer followed by legal pressure, and always the same name appearing at the center, David Sterling. Robert had tracked everything. Emails printed out, property transfers highlighted in yellow, newspaper clippings about quiet foreclosures and unexpected sales. In the margins, Robert had written notes like coercion disguised as partnership and targets elderly relatives. My hands went cold. At the bottom of the last folder was a sealed envelope addressed to a law firm in Denver and signed, a backup plan Robert had prepared but never sent. Inside was a full timeline, sworn statements, and instructions for immediate legal action if Sterling ever approached me directly, which he had. I didn't hesitate. By afternoon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, one recommended by Robert's notes. She read through the documents in silence, her expression growing more serious by the minute. "This is strong," she finally said. "Very strong. Enough to file for a protective injunction and put pressure back on him." "Will it stop him?" I asked. She leaned back. "It'll slow him, and it'll make him nervous." That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Sterling's voice came through smooth and irritated. "Evelyn, you've made a mistake involving attorneys. This was meant to stay simple." Simple for him. A second message followed minutes later. "Deals don't get better when they're delayed." I saved the messages. Then, just before midnight, I received a text from Bella. "You don't know who you're fighting. Walk away while you can." I stared at the screen, not afraid anymore, angry, because now I understood something clearly. Robert hadn't just protected me with paperwork. He'd given me leverage. And the next morning, I used it, starting with the one person Sterling never expected to turn against him. The one person Sterling never expected to hear from was James. Not as a desperate debtor, not as a frightened son, but as a witness. James called me early that morning, his voice steadier than I'd heard in years. He said he hadn't slept, said he'd finally read every page of what he'd signed, said Bella had left the apartment after a screaming match the night before. She knew, he told me, about everything. About Sterling's history. She married me because I was useful. That admission didn't erase the damage, but it cracked something open. I arranged a meeting with my lawyer that afternoon and insisted James come. When she explained what cooperation could mean, reduced liability, protection from Sterling's intimidation, James didn't hesitate. "I'll give you everything," he said. "Texts, emails, call logs, audio if you want." And he had them. Messages from Sterling pressuring him to push me. Voice notes from Bella rehearsing what to say at the will reading. Even a recorded call where Sterling laughed and said, "Old people panic when you mention court." My lawyer's face hardened. "That changes everything." Within days, formal complaints were filed. Not just on my behalf, but tied to multiple properties Robert had documented. Investigators began connecting dots Sterling had assumed were buried forever. That was when the pressure shifted. Sterling's calls stopped. His tone changed from confident to cautious. Then the counterattack came. A legal notice arrived claiming James had pre-committed the property and that I was interfering with a lawful agreement. It was flimsy, rushed, desperate. My lawyer smiled when she read it. "He's bleeding leverage," she said. "This is what it looks like when someone's scared." James asked to come to the lodge one last time to apologize properly. I agreed, with conditions. No business talk, no Bella, no pressure. He stood on the porch where he'd once yelled at me years ago. His eyes wet, shoulders slumped. "I forgot who you were," he said, "and what this place meant." I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I listened. 2 nights later, Bella showed up uninvited. She accused James of betrayal, accused me of manipulation, threatened lawsuits that meant nothing now. When she finally left, she said something that confirmed it all. "You think this ends with Sterling. He's not the only one." She was right. But she was too late, because the final move wasn't about revenge. It was about erasing their power forever. By the time Bella left, I knew what had to be done. This wasn't just about the lodge. It wasn't even just about Sterling or my son. It was about ensuring no one could ever manipulate or threaten me or my brother's legacy. I called Thomas Whitfield, Robert's lawyer. We reviewed every document Robert had left behind. Every clause, every note, every email. The trigger clause that had seemed like a safety net now became a weapon. Any attempt to seize, sell, or develop the lodge without my notarized approval would automatically transfer it to the national land trust, permanently, untouchable. I coordinated with Dylan Thompson, the architect, and Rick Sanderson, the retired deputy. They would be witnesses, ready to record, document, and protect. Cameras were set in hidden spots around the lodge, audio equipment tucked into lamps and bookshelves. Everything backed up in real time to multiple cloud accounts. Every conversation, every threat, every confession would be captured. Then came the meeting. Sterling, Bella, and James arrived, expecting surrender, expecting me to sign over the property in fear. Instead, they walked into a trap. Every word they said was recorded. Every lie, every hint of coercion, every threat documented for the authorities. Sterling tried to intimidate. Bella tried to charm. James hesitated, torn between fear and honesty. But I stayed calm. My heart may have been racing, but my mind was clear. I wasn't just defending property. I was defending truth, justice, and the life Robert had entrusted to me. When the recordings and evidence were delivered to the authorities, Sterling's empire began to unravel. Federal agents, state police, and legal teams moved swiftly. Investigations expanded nationwide. Bella's pattern of fraud spanning multiple families and states was exposed. And James? He had to face the consequences of his choices, but he had a chance to redeem himself. After it was over, the lodge was truly mine. Not just in deed, but in spirit. The house was quiet again. The mountains stretched around me, untouched, safe. I sat by the fireplace, thinking about Robert's foresight, about the son I had raised, and the challenges we'd survived. It had been a test of loyalty, patience, and courage, and I had passed. Because sometimes surviving isn't about fighting harder. It's about fighting smarter. I poured a cup of tea, wrapped myself in Robert's old flannel, and finally let myself breathe. The lodge was mine, the legacy safe, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments what city are you watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so more people remember. No matter how old you are, it's never too late to stand up for yourself.